This is The Speaking Show. I'm David Newman, and you're tuned in to the #1 podcast for speakers, consultants, and experts who want to speak more profitably. Coffee chat between friends. That's the whole vibe. That's what I told J.D. Gershbein when he came on The Speaking Show. J.D. Gershbein, look, there you are. Welcome to The Speaking Show.
Is this where I say thank you for having me?
It is.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, on your website, it says, J.D. Gershbein has been described as a man who defies description. So they don't pay me enough to host this thing to figure that out. Could you give us a little professional backstory, JD, of what brought you to the work that you're doing today and all the fun pit stops along the way?
Yeah, it's kind of a catch me if you can type of bio, David. If anything, I've been a continuous study in adaptation, really from the start of my professional career, which goes back longer than I'd care to admit on your program. But I really shifted from a traditional marketing practice to a social media marketing practice right at the onset. I'm a mid-stage early adopter of social media, and really since 2006, I self-classify as a personal brand strategist who has spent maybe 50,000 hours on LinkedIn and can talk intelligently about that subject.
You were into LinkedIn training before even LinkedIn was cool. You were into LinkedIn when everyone thought, literally everyone thought, it was for job seekers and recruiters, and that's it.
I had to wait for people to come find me, yes.
So tell us a little bit about that kind of early pioneering days. What kind of projects and what kind of clients were you getting pulled into then? And then how has that evolved through to the present day?
Well, I knew I would have come to LinkedIn eventually, but the way that I discovered it was very serendipitous. I was at a networking event. I was networking very aggressively in those days, right at the time that the recession was taking hold. So an economic downturn, it was probably not the best time to go out on an entrepreneurial wave like this and launch a business on an untested medium. But I saw something in this, and just the way that I'm hardwired, David, I knew that it was going to be good, and I knew that I could make it good. And really from day one, what I set out to do was make the platform my own. And it has permeated in every level of teaching and speaking and writing on this. It's about really advising people to make social media their own and obviously sort it out when it comes to best practices and ethics and guidelines and all that. But at the time I started, there was no playbook. There was no guidelines. And we were all kind of looking at each other, trying to figure it out, having meetings in coffee shops with our laptops up going, what the hell is this? How do we make some sense of it? And again, over time, as LinkedIn became, well, LinkedIn, more people started to hitch their star to it. And suddenly, literally out of nowhere, I had a career.
What's the intersection, do you think, of marketing, communication, improv, social media, because there's a common DNA strand. And I know that you probably know what it is, and I'm sensing it, but I can't put my finger on it. So between all of your speaking, like you said, speaking, publishing, coaching, consulting with companies, what's the bright thread that goes through all of that connects all those different disciplines?
I really think the common thread that runs through it all is personal branding. And I've really been in that branding conversation since I started in marketing. And personal branding has evolved into different designer vocabulary terms like social selling and brand storytelling. And now we're charged to be storytellers. We have to be stewards of our stories. And David, as you know, it's very difficult to tell stories. That's why people are hiring others to tell their stories for them. And suddenly there's this urgency for narrative, and we need to probe our depths and truly self-assess and reconcile what we do as professionals and how we're perceived in the marketplace. And that's the great tie-in between how we have reached people in the feet on the floor physical world and what we can do online. And that's where I've always saw the interest for me, is bridging that gap and what I call breaking the plane seamlessly between the real and the virtual worlds.
Now, one of the areas that you also mentioned, and we should add to that list, is thought leadership, personal branding, thought leadership, social selling, et cetera, all these other. As you're talking, I had an image in my mind that we're looking at a jewel, and depending on which facet we happen to turn to the sunlight. Oh, you're calling that thought leadership. Oh, over here, these people might call it personal branding. Oh, over here, these other folks might call it social selling. But we're really looking at one diamond that might have 10, 12 different facets to it and has different applications in different contexts. Talk a little bit about, where does the personal brand that we develop as business people, as executives, as entrepreneurs, where does that cross over into the company brand or the larger brand? And then where have you seen some real success stories and some real disconnects with the clients that come to you?
Well, I've been playing in the thought leadership space really during my whole tenure on social platforms. And I don't think we called it thought leadership. I first heard the term right around 2010. And prior to that, if you ask most people, they would have told you that thought leaders are relegated to the learned among us who have written multiple books, who had traditional media outlets, and were celebrities to a certain point. They were the thought leaders. They guided opinion, or what we would call the popular notion out there. And now anybody can self-declare as a thought leader. Personally, I think it's an anointed title, David. I don't think anybody should declare out of the first person that they are thought leaders. It's something that has to be conferred on you. And as people started to realize the importance of their personal brands, they had a tie-in with the company. They realized they were ambassadors of the corporate story. But then everything was done on the level of an individual profile. So where LinkedIn really ascended in prominence is when people started to realize that the decisions on them could be made on this one page. And it really has become their most prized digital asset. And that's the first point of reference on anyone in the business universe now. We've gotten to that point. So the tie-in between certain personal brand archetypes that I've elucidated through the years, like executive leader, thought leader, trusted advisor, solutionist, innovator, these are the way that we want to be thought of by those that we serve and touch. So in my book, you can say anything that you want to on the online media. It's how you live up to it in the real world that matters. And where I've been is that interface between helping people come clear on their narrative and making sure they tell a story that's congruent with what we see of them online.
Right. What do you say, JD, to the executive or even maybe the C-level executive who says, well, JD, this is all great, but we already have a PR department. We have a whole bunch of kids, they call them kids, in the social media group, and they're tweeting and they're on Facebook and they're doing our promotions. Why do I need to get involved in this? I mean, it's not about me. And even some genuinely humble CEOs, and there are a few out there, they say, well, I don't want to steal the spotlight. It's not about me. It's about the company, or it's about our customers. It's about our prospects. It's about the value that we're adding in the marketplace. How would it possibly help if I'm out there trumpeting and Facebooking and LinkedIning? And is LinkedIning a verb? I'm not even sure.
It's like the CEO is saying, hey, why can't I just sit here in my siloed environment and just let my team handle it, right?
Something like that. But even with both good intention and perhaps a little bit of, I'm too big for this. But whatever the impetus is, why is that wrong?
Well, I think that resistance has diminished over time from the C-level, and executives who thought literally that LinkedIn should be for their people and not for themselves are slowly coming to the realization that they are the stewards of their story and the company's story. And that's all tied in with engendering brand loyalty and making sure that objectives are met out there in the outreach. Or I can firmly remember being a Vistage speaker in the early going and coming in and talking about LinkedIn, which was a burgeoning platform at the time. It had not reached the status that it enjoys right now or today as we tape. But looking out into that sea of disapproving scowls as if to say, hey, why should I be doing this? Why should I care? And it wasn't so much as to try to win them over as it was to try to let them know that someday, whether they're up-leveling their business in the stakeholder realm for an exit, whether they're in a merger or acquisition, whether they're in a turnaround environment, the eyes are going to go to leadership. And sooner or later, the profiles of leadership are going to make a difference. And we're actually seeing that. We are now fully aware that leaders have more of an equity stake than they thought in how the company performs on social media. They're the person, they're the turn to person.
I have heard, and I think it might have been Mark Schaefer who said this in a presentation, and I'm just trying to get my head around it, and I'd love your take on it. He says, we're living in a world where your personal brand is more important than your corporate brand. Period. End of sentence. Doesn't matter how big your company is, Amazon, Walmart, Apple, name the biggest brands in the world. When I see an executive from Apple, that person's either going to impress me or not. I see him in person, I see him online, I see him on social media. It's like, oh, Apple. Well, but wait a second, this guy's coming across like kind of a schmuck. So now do I say, no, that's okay. He's not a schmuck because he's got an Apple logo on his business card. Or is the personal brand more impactful and more important than the corporate brand?
And I suppose that you'd have to inquire as to what is the relative importance of branding to that individual. There are executives who truly like to low key it, and they will never represent on social media. Some of the most important people in business have LinkedIn profiles, but that doesn't necessarily mean they run them. They may front them, but obviously we know there's a team of administrators, maybe some fresh-faced millennials in the back office who are posting for them. So the key is that whereas it's important to have a company presence online, at least if we're talking in LinkedIn terms, all of the legwork, all of the conversion, all of the winning is done on the level of an individual's profile. And those are typically people who are in managerial capacities, in client-facing roles, people who are really the couriers of the company brand. So again, very important for the executive to have a presence at this point. They're not the ones who are going to be doing LinkedIn, but obviously they have to have some say in it because as we know, social media, I mean, there's a fine line between doing well and truly stepping in it. And so many companies step in it. And when they step in it, David, it's not going to be LinkedIn news. It's going to be Wall Street Journal news, Business Insider news, Forbes news. And I think companies have to realize that the leadership team is where the buck stops.
So we're going to circle back to this at the end, but I want to just make it clear right now for folks that might be zipping off to various things. You help clients, you help executives, you help companies on the strategic level and a couple of other levels. Talk about what are the various ways that a client executive or a client company can tap in to your kind of help that we're talking about here.
Well, typically there's some urgency of whether it's messaging, whether it's branding, whether it's content. We now see that companies are becoming broadcast platforms. So there's this real scramble for positioning now. Obviously, the goal is to make sure that the team looks great. And LinkedIn profile writing is a service that I've been providing since 2006. I think I do it like nobody else in the world, not saying it boastfully, but just because I bring in a unique blend of science and art to it. I'm really interested in rendering my clients as true thought leaders or trusted advisors or the types of professionals that they envision themselves. And that comes through a reimagination process where they truly reconcile their professional value for me and go out there in the way that they feel most confidently. And then the other piece, obviously, is how are they going to engage? What are they going to do to engage? And how do they capitalize on that engagement? And that means building the network. So it's one thing to have a great profile because you can't do much without it. But once you start building the network, which is what a lot of people have done throughout the years on LinkedIn, yourself included, I would imagine, David, is they take a look at these names in their directory and they will have a furrowed brow and they will go, who the hell are these people? Why did they gain access to my network? And then the problem really starts. How do you manage these relationships? How do you triage the important conversations and really generate opportunities from an organic base of people who are supposedly your allies in business? So I think that's really the key issue is developing the profile so that the profile drives your outcomes on the site. It's been my hypothesis all along that anyone's success is going to be driven by their profile. It's building the network around the outcome, and it's massaging and finessing certain conversations out of the LinkedIn world and into now, because we are knee-deep in a pandemic as we tape this, into the online world, specifically on Zoom calls.
Hey, this interview is a real moneymaker. If you're serious about ramping up your reach and revenue as a speaker, trainer, or expert, book a confidential speaker strategy call with our team. The link is doitmarketing.com/call. It will be the most valuable 45 minutes you invest in your speaking-driven business. Speaking of value, let's get back to the show. I want to talk about two things right now. Number one is you speaking all around the country, all around the world at these events, conferences, national meetings, etc. And then also media. You have a lot of media credits. You're on TV. You are a spokesperson. You are a media personality. Given that we are recording this right now in the midst of our coronavirus pandemic, and there's no face-to-face meetings right now, different parts of the country are in different levels of lockdown. How do we translate a strong stage presence that some CEOs and executives and entrepreneurs had or have, but they're not exercising it right now? How do we translate that strong stage presence into a strong virtual presence? Let's answer that first, then I've got some media questions for you.
Can I just state for the record, sir, that I miss speaking in front of a live audience? Can I just put that out there for you?
You can.
You feel the same way, I would
I
imagine.
do.
It's horrible what's happened to our industry. And again, as we tape, we're still on the rising side of the curve. Who knows what's going to happen? I don't purport to be a leader or a prognosticator, but I'm just doing what the leaders tell me to do at this point. So obviously, another case of continuous adaptation. We've gone online. We have to be better online orators. We have to execute as speakers in front of an audience. And how is that done? Well, it's done through a medium that's not as sharp and as lively or as energized as the live environment, but it's professional speaking. And I've been imploring people to take their Zoom meetings seriously, not from the level of a communications coach, but from the level of truly summoning forth from my improv background at Second City and being present in the moment and really communicating your value in a way that has meaning and context and interest to people. Just as a case in point, I've been doing, like many, a lot of virtual meetings. Some I'm facilitating, others I'm an attendee. And I've watched how people kind of comport themselves when their webcam is on. And it's very easy to have a resting bitch face during the most part of a presentation and just be in these horribly sardonic expressions with our jawlines down and we're just looking. Maybe some folks are checking emails on the other side. You never know. But when you're truly engaged and you can, as I say, show up, step up, and follow up, you really have the ability to convert these Zoom conversations into meaningful business wins. And with a lot of talk of Zoom fatigue, I think many people are realizing what we speakers have known for a long time, and that it takes a lot of energy to just be on.
Yeah, for sure. Man, we could talk for an hour just on this topic, but I want to pick out some of the highlights here. You are a seasoned improv guy. Improv, Second City there in Chicago. I studied improv in graduate school because it was part of my MFA in stage directing. Improv, and you and I both know this, but listeners might not. Improv is not about quick responses and being clever. That is an outcome of truly, deeply listening. Listening, being open, being present, that's what makes you come up with the in the moment, again, in the moment being a key phrase, in the moment comeback that some might find amusing or funny or ironic or what have you. Without the listening, it's very different than stand-up comedy, right? Stand-up comedy is written, improv is performed, and you never know. You never know how an improv sketch is going to end. Talk a little bit about how does that connect with what we could be, should be, and want to be doing in a virtual presentation, Zoom, Facebook Live, webinar, etc.
With improv, you're conjuring something out of thin air. It doesn't exist until you say it. It doesn't even exist after you think it because it still has to be delivered within some framework. So what we learned in Second City, the hallmark of the Second City philosophy, the credo, is yes and. So what we should be doing, whether it's on Zoom, whether it's in the real world, on the phone, through email, and you're very, very good at this, David, is having conversations with people on email, is always be extending conversations. Never let the thing die. I equate it to those old-time acts. We saw him on the Ed Sullivan Show, which of course dates me, I'm sure. The guy that would come out and keep all the plates spinning. He'd put a plate on a pole and he'd spin it. He'd give a requisite amount of force where it would spin and he wouldn't have to go back to it for a while. In the meantime, he would get another plate spinning on another pole. In the meantime, another on another pole. And sooner or later, he'd have all these plates spinning. But As he was attending to certain plates, other plates would lose their energy, and he would have to kind of rev it up again to make sure that it stayed spinning. If he didn't, what would happen?
Drop the plate.
The immutable law of physics, of course, it would stop, drop, and crash. So basically, the same can be said in conversations. We're improvising our way through everything right now. We don't know what we're going to type. Sometimes we get keyboard courage and we know what we're going to say. We want to influence an outcome. But to do that in messaging these days, you have to continuously be asking questions. And I've taken it upon myself to ask questions to end every single message and email that I make. That doesn't mean to say that they're going to go on ad nauseum, but the people with whom that I'm generating something, that I'm co-creating with, they know that we've got this dialogue going on. It's continuous. I call that keeping conversations in play. Very similar to keeping a pinball up, bouncing off stuff because you've got your fingers on the flippers, and it can happen fast where the ball just kind of hits that wave and just goes right down the drain beyond the scope of your flippers. So we have been forced in today's changing environment by just keeping important conversations in front of us because there's opportunity there. We know that. And we just have to attend to it on a regular basis, keep our filters on, make sure we respond well, and become totally accountable in our interactions with others.
This is such a gold mine. In case you missed it, hit the rewind button, pull the car over, rewind. What JD just said, and I just didn't even think of it the way that you said it. My initial thought was, and this is proven with email marketing studies, anytime you end a single email with a question, it always increases your response rate, right? What do you think? Will you please get back to me? Question mark. It's literally the last thing before you sign off is a question. That increases response rates. But you're saying we keep it going. We don't just stop there. We respond and we engage and we ask another question at the end of that. And this just draws people out into a conversational email dialogue. I mean, how does this play out with prospecting? How does this play out with marketing? Give us a couple of use cases where you've had some brilliant success with this.
Well, let's go to LinkedIn, shall we? Several years ago, LinkedIn scrapped its inbox in favor of the typical messaging system that was being used on Facebook. And LinkedIn has stolen from Facebook through the years. And one thing they did that was to their credit was they installed a messaging system in the messaging section of their platform. And basically, that's a great way. That's probably the best of the best CRM instruments available to us on LinkedIn because we can see these conversations. And obviously, some are meant to have a very short shelf life. You don't need to keep them going. But conversations with prospects, conversations with important colleagues, strategic partners, allies, potential first-degree connections who could really move up the hierarchy in your network. These are important conversations, what we would call meaningful conversations. And these are the ones that we have to continuously be exerting our influence in. We have to make sure that we are, quote unquote, front of mind. I prefer front of mind to top of mind, David. That's where the frontal lobe is. And we want to make sure that, yes, we are seen on a daily basis by people who are paying attention to their emails and their messaging. So I've just adopted a system where, until further notice, I consider everyone to be in play. And if they're not in play or they don't return an email or two, and it's very easy to get sidetracked, we've got a lot coming at us, we bookmark and we can always go back and we can see where we left off and we can pick up. And again, through improv, it's staying in the moment. And one thing that the global pandemic has done is it's given us all a universal conversation starter. How are you managing these days? Question mark. Best regards, David.
I have one that's very, very similar. It's just, how are you doing in all this craziness? Right? So you put your own little spin on it, your own little personality, but that's the essence of it for sure. That is the universal reach out, hey, I was thinking of you. How are you managing? How are you doing in all this craziness? What's your world look like these days, et cetera?
Let me throw a hypothetical out for the listeners, and that would be, what does that reply look like? If someone's going to blow you off, they're going to blow you off. But if they're going to come back and say, JD, hey, thanks for asking. I'm doing ABC and maybe a little XYZ. How are you managing these days? They've responded to my question with a question of their own. And in the world of sales, we, of course, call that a touch point. So I'm back. I don't let people off the hook, man. If they're coming back asking me a question, no, I'm not going to be overly transparent and I'm not going to open the window that wide into my world. But again, we parse out our value in these messages that go back and forth. And sooner or later, you kind of create that lane and you can kind of move down that lane slowly at first into a sales dialogue and ideally create sales moments through these innocuous conversations.
One thing that I know you teach, but is also prevalent, the bad version of it is prevalent. And I've had this conversation with many clients. I am sure you have as well. JD, LinkedIn has become so spammy. People are reaching out to me with a connection request. I accept. And the first thing they send me is, hey, here's our service. Here's our program. You want to sign up for some coaching? Here's what we do. Here's what we sell. I'd love to take 10 minutes of your time. This is how silly some salespeople are. They actually say, I would like to take 10 minutes of your time. It's like, dude, no one's taking my time. No, thank you. Go away. How has the ubiquity of this LinkedIn messaging that you just praised put in the hands of unsophisticated sellers? It really poisons the pond for all of us, doesn't it? How does that play out?
You are so right. I call them bad actors. And it become pervasive and it's insulting and it's offensive and it's an egregious breach of ethics. And I report all of them. I can't stand it anymore.
You can report these folks?
Oh, you can report them. Absolutely. Those three dots in the message, you click on those three dots and one of them will be report as inappropriate. And then it'll take you through a series of prompts. I don't know what LinkedIn is doing about them, but I feel better at least by reporting them.
Have you ever gotten any official feedback from LinkedIn saying, thank you, we've given a warning to this person, or you never hear back?
No, but I would imagine that if they get multiple reports on certain users, I'm sure they can suspend or restrict an account.
Just suspend their account, yeah.
Absolutely. But what's the most offensive of all, the most intrusive of all, is getting the sales pitch rammed down your throat on an invitation to connect. It just goes against the grain of everything I've done, everything I've taught, everything I've shown my clients and students as to how to effectively navigate LinkedIn. Is these people are operating from a purely transactional perspective, not relational. They have no interest in developing a relationship with you. They're just interested in keeping their funnel full, as opposed to the conscientious LinkedIn user who will personalize an invitation, who you can see had visited your profile, and you've got a couple of touch points before you've even moved to have an off LinkedIn call. So why people are paying these other people who come under the guise of LinkedIn lead specialists, and they're not. They're paying them thousands of dollars to churn out these spammy automated messages on a highly developed software system. It's an insult to my sensibilities. It's predatory. I've responded to them by saying, hey, man, automatic lead generators do not work on LinkedIn, and it's a violation of their terms of service. I've told people I've reported them as spammers. It's not that I'm a vigilante trying to clean up the mess on LinkedIn. It happens way too much for one person, but everybody realizes it. We've smartened up to the point where we know we're not buying on something like that, are we?
Right.
Have you bought from anyone who's done that?
I have not, but I think this would be a good time for a totally transparent moment, is that I do have this messaging going out that you accidentally got caught in. And it's like, well, JD, although you and I haven't met, and then you send me back a very nice email going, dude, we have met. What the hell is this? I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You got caught in my LinkedIn sort of autoresponder thing. And then I said, by the way, let's reconnect, because you and I met, 10 years ago at NSA, Illinois?
I believe.
10 or more years ago, maybe 2009, 2008.
Yes.
And then we just kind of stayed connected on social media and so on and so forth. So, this is a genuine relationship, although it's gone a little bit dormant, and now we're repairing that, which is good.
Nothing like a podcast to restore what we have.
Nothing like a podcast to connect two old buddies here. So give us a messaging track that would be high integrity, value first, and would be welcome, instead of come across as getting married on the first date, overly spammy, overly weird. What does that look like?
Well, you're always going to have these oppositional forces at play between the should I sell or should I hold back parts of the brain. And obviously, there are people who have undergone much more classical sales training programs than I have. I've taught sales teams how to effectively use LinkedIn, and sometimes they'll roll their eyes because it's a slow and steady race and they're used to the quick hit. And LinkedIn is not a mass messaging platform. It is not a sales platform per se. It is an instrument that is designed to get us from a state of knowing nothing about a prospect to a state of establishing trust and rapport where it can be merged with our own systems to develop a sales talk track. So by selling people or by doing competitive intelligence, by again going into a LinkedIn group, which by the way, groups are on life support at this point, they're pretty much dead, and just overtly promoting a product or service, nobody's buying. Just nobody's buying. So what do? Out of frustration, people will either abstain from it, they'll get stressed out, or they'll revert to these old tactics of just connecting with people, and then boom, there's their e-newsletter right in your email box. So it really is a tortoise and the hare proposition to really generate revenue using LinkedIn effectively. It has to be methodical and systematic, and you've got to really come at people from a place of respect. Don't offend them by selling. You've got to earn that right in anything.
This is so spot on. I'm just kind of connecting some loose dots that were in my head. My head is full of loose dots most of the time. When you said LinkedIn is not a mass messaging platform, I think these inelegant sellers, we call them bad actors, I call them inelegant sellers, but one and the same. They're just looking at huge chunks of the market, as opposed to what we should be doing based on what you're telling us here is pick 10, hand pick 10, 15, maybe 20 prospects that you have done some homework on. You have done some research. You have perhaps done some intelligent prospecting / stalking, and you would like to build, based on that research, you would like to build a genuine relationship with them, intentionally befriending your next batch of prospects. But let's put that in order. Number one, intentionally befriending may or may not become a prospect. Let's see where it goes. But think of where else that relationship might go. That person might never buy from you, but they introduce you to your next 5 biggest clients. They might never buy from you, but they might be a promotional partner or a joint venture partner that you will email their list, they will email your list, and you will have a beautiful relationship for years and years to come. They may refer you, they may recommend you, their spouse, their significant other, their son, their daughter, their dad, their mom may be a highly placed executive. Once you establish a value conversation with them, it might be a direct one step away, like 6 degrees of JD Gershwin. It might be one step away from something really, really good. It sounds to me, JD, like you have to go into this with a very laser targeted focus and almost no expectation, right? So, or a positive expectation without attachment to the outcome.
It recalls my Second City moments where I would walk on stage and I would have a scene partner. And we basically know the loose ends of the subject, but I have no idea what's coming next until he or she says something. And then I respond. And then he or she responds. So again, you never know what's at the other end of a LinkedIn invitation. So many invitations come to people that are generic, boilerplate with the prefab text. And again, how do you move a generic invitation to a sales dialogue? Well, there's a process involved. Again, you stage touch points. It's sequential conversation. It may not have anything at the other end other than that this person just wants to pad numbers in their network. But for the most part, especially now in the healthcare crisis that we're facing, the need for human connectedness, it's driving conversations in an entirely different way. And I don't come at people with the urge to sell. I really never have. I come at people with the urge of they're booking a half hour with me. It's an exploratory conversation. Many people use the term exploratory or introductory conversation. It doesn't mean that I should hear the question, well, JD, how are you fixed for data storage? It should be about how are you? How's your family? What do you do to keep your mind on your work during the day? What kinds of things are you noticing out there? Talk about the behavioral shifts around what you do. And these are the conversations that will eventually unearth pain. And if you are the solution to that pain or the aspirin that can alleviate that pain, it's fine to introduce it because you're on that level. But you don't just arrive there. You do need to put in the exchange of pleasantries. You do need to find out about people on a visceral level, not just a, gee, do you think they'll buy from me level? And to your point that you said in framing the question, you approach people from the level of co-creating and collaborating and not selling, you're going to wind up in conversations like, who can I introduce you to? Or, I was just speaking with an executive the other day who I think would be important for you to meet. These things come to mind when you've established that layer of trust that you don't get from just an overt sales pitch.
Super quick commercial break. Isn't this interview amazing? If you'd like to get more ideas on how to start or grow your speaking business fast, pop over to our free training at doitmarketing.com/webinar. So you're going to have some value items in your back pocket. For example, JD, who might be a good referral for you? As I'm networking with other folks, I want to be sensitive that there may be one or two of these folks that would be great for you to meet. What kind of person should I be on the lookout for? And when I ask you that question, I'm genuinely want to know the answer. And perhaps I have a little positive expectation that you will ask me the same. And when I say, oh, well, I would like to meet XYZ kind of person, if they happen to be XYZ kind of person, they're smart. They're going to figure it out. You don't need to beat them over the head. I'm looking for handsome bald men who wear glasses because I'm a handsome bald man who wears glasses. Now, you also happen to be a handsome bald man who wears glasses. I don't need to hammer that point home. You're like, oh, well, maybe you and I can have a separate conversation at some point because I'm wrestling with this issue. I'm wrestling with that issue. I just got an email real time right before we turned on the mics here. A friend of mine emails me, says, David, I know you do this for a living, but I have a key question. I would love, to have a conversation with you, just vet this idea, see where it goes from there. I said, listen, I'm happy to talk to you anytime. Don't feel that, I do this for a living, so you have to pay me money for an exploratory chat. I will help you as much as I possibly can. No expectation. My sales radar did not go off. My ears did not perk up. I'm just going to help this person. If he wants to go to the next step, fabulous. Not attached to it, not important to me. I am here to help and serve before I'm here to pitch and sell. I think that gene, that DNA strand needs to be developed. Don't you? That people are they're like a dog after the hungry red meat.
It's interesting. It comes right out of Networking 101. And before the onset of the pandemic, we were meeting people, we were networking, and we were going to coffee shops and very cool little gathering workspaces now. In my hometown of Chicago, so many cool places now to just meet people and be in a casual environment and let the space kind of do its job on your brain and bring cool stuff out of you. That's a classical question from those networking encounters is, who's an ideal prospect for you? And that shows the willingness to make introductions. And I've kind of been uncomfortable around that because I don't know. I can't get into the mind of another person. I really answer that question by saying, David, I'm in the business of meeting good human beings. I don't have a target market because I could be working with a C-level executive one day and a project manager looking for his or her next success the next day. So I don't really have that target market that many of my clients bring to me with. I'm a very organic networker, very experientially based. As a speaker, I connect with people who have been in my audience, providing they give me permission to keep in touch with them. So I'm interested in building a mean, lean network. I'm not interested in having the most toys. So for me, I'm just, again, interested in meeting good people who are receptive to me, who might want to take the time to know, like, and get me. And then it becomes exploratory. And then it becomes these types of conversations that we've been talking about and now getting them on Zoom. 30-minute conversation on Zoom. I think we can make a distinction as to whether or not we want another 30 minutes with someone after one.
Right. So it sounds like it's a quality, not a quantity play. But I'm just channeling our listeners here, JD, and the thought that might be in their mind is, oh my God, how does JD have that kind of time? I don't have that kind of time to meet with every Tom, Dick, Harry, and Jane who might want half an hour of my time. So how do you decide or how do you protect your time while still being generous with it?
Well, if the pandemic has shown us anything, And I want to just be a little bit time specific here. So people who are listening 25, 30 years from now will know we've had this bad pandemic on our hands. So during the course of the pandemic, I've been completely rewired to a certain point. And it's not that I give anybody the benefit of the doubt and will be on any Zoom conversation with anyone who wants to take time with me, but it's really about how I'm perceiving the world as well and who I feel are the professionals who could have economic and intellectual and emotional value to me. So in other words, we're all protective of our time. My gosh, if anything has put us in touch with our fragility and the time sensitivity of things, it's this, what we're going through right now. But at the same time, we're maneuvering in and out of these various online communities. We're meeting a lot of people. Never in the history of business have we been able to connect and meet and exchange pleasantries with so many people in a given call. Zoom has really, it's come out of nowhere to be that kind of relationship accelerant. So in a Zoom call, I will take stock of the people who are on the call. What I try to do is shine on my calls, to be honest with you. If I'm going to say only one thing in a 20 or 25 person Zoom meeting, it's going to be a damn important thing to say. And I'm going to measure it well. And I'm going to be cute and I'm going to be funny, but I'm going to create value and all of that. And invariably after that Zoom call, I'll get 3 to 6 new invitations to connect, personalized from people who are on the call with me saying, hey, man, I really liked not only what you had to say, but how you said it.
Am I right in hearing that you are going to convene a group call with 20 or 25 cool people that you'd like to get to know? Or are these calls all one-on-one?
I'm holding my own virtual roundtables on topics of LinkedIn, personal branding, and social networking, but I'm also migrating in and out of these other various communities. And I'm with some really smart people who have a lot to say. And part of what we're doing now, and Zoom is certainly letting us do that, is we're listening, we're self-assessing, we're recharging, we're recalibrating, we're refashioning. Take the prefix re, put a hyphen on it, and insert any word you'd like. So now is the time we're kind of collecting our insights. We're maneuvering with the help of people through some of our decision making. And there's some smart people who are showing up in our lives right now. And these are the people we should be on the Zoom calls with. And again, it's 30 minutes. What's the worst that could happen? We're relaxed, we're unplugged, we're a little less guarded than we used to be in a professional setting. We're showing up in hoodies and flannel pajamas to business calls now. So come on.
I love it. Wow. So smart. Well, JD, this has been so fantastic. Thank you for sharing your brilliance. How do people get connected and stay connected to more JD Gershbein? And we're going to hook up all of these in the show notes directly below this episode at thespeakingshow.com. And there's going to be all kinds of cool things. We're going to send people to your website, to your LinkedIn, where else?
Well, actually, the LinkedIn profile is the epicenter of my branding and marketing universe. So if they can spell my name, they can find me on LinkedIn, and I'll give them that leg up. It's JD, initials JD, no periods, Gershbein, Gershbein. After a review of my LinkedIn profile, they'll be so compelled to send me an invitation to connect that they will. But as long as it's personalized, I've got a good chance of accepting it.
And a great way to personalize it may be, JD, I heard your fantastic interview on The Speaking Show with Newman. Dude, you are so awesome. I got to connect with you. That's what it's going to say.
And may I say, if I can throw a little back at you, I know that you're one of the people who are out there as a true advocate for the speaker, the professional speaker, and the trade. I'm just really hopeful and optimistic that speaking makes a comeback the way it has, because we need resources like you to keep speakers' heads in the games and make them, really accountable in their work with audiences. Everybody's rebuilding their audience from the start right now, as far as I'm concerned. It's a level playing field, and having resources like you and this show, very important to anyone who wants to make a dent as a speaker. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, JD. Thank you. And like I said earlier, we have to have you back, because I know there is more wisdom in that brain of yours that needs to be squeezed like a fresh lemon.
Or a walnut.
Or a walnut. Either way. All right, my friend. Great to have you on.
David, thank you very much. Thank you, listeners.
Well, that wraps up another episode of The Speaking Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on iTunes. Subscribe. Tell a friend. Go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thespeakingshow.com. See you next time.